My name is Isla Merrick. I'm 29 years old, and what I'm about to tell you still feels like something out of a nightmare, except I grew up in Briarwood, a quiet town where everyone waves at each other and families stay for generations. I thought I knew everything about mine, but the truth was darker than I could have imagined, and what I found out pushed me to do something. I never thought I was capable of taking revenge on the very people who raised me, if you think you can see. Betrayal coming my story might change your mind. Stay with me until the end because you won't believe where this goes. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so more people can hear it. This story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. Looking back now, I realized the first crack in the facade appeared during a winter storm, the kind that made our little town feel like it was holding its breath under a blanket of snow, but at the time I didn't recognize it for what it was. I had just moved back from Boston after a messy breakup, thinking the quiet would be good for me and my parents. Thomas and Evelyn Merrick welcomed me back into the old Victorian house like nothing had changed, though I could tell something had. My younger sister Harper, who had always been a free spirit, seemed tense and distracted, avoiding eye contact whenever Dad spoke, and Mom kept glancing at her like there was a secret between them I wasn't part of, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. The Merrick family was a fixture in Briarwood, owning the town's only antique shop. Merrick's finds, a place I had worked in as a teenager, dusting old shelves and polishing silverware, so when Dad asked if I could help out for a few months while Harper took some time away, I agreed without hesitation, thinking it would be a simple way to ease back into small-town life, but it didn't take long for me to notice things that didn't add up, like shipments arriving at odd hours, boxes that were never put out for sale, and the sudden appearance of customers who paid in cash and didn't browse, just went straight to the back office. The first time I brought it up to Dad, he smiled. That disarming smile he'd used my whole life, and said, "Not everything's your business, Isla," which stung more than I wanted to admit, but I let it go until one night when I stayed late to finish an inventory list and heard voices in the office. Dad's low, measured tone, Harper's sharper, almost panicked voice, and then the unmistakable sound of a drawer slamming shut, followed by Harper saying, "She's going to find out, and when she does it's over," which made my heart lurch. Because there was only one she in this context, and it was me. I ducked into the shadows near the stockroom as they came out, both looking startled to see me, and Dad quickly said, "Harper was just upset about personal stuff," but Harper wouldn't meet my eyes, and the unease that had been whispering at me for weeks turned into a loud, insistent roar. From that night on, I started paying closer attention, pretending not to notice when Dad would lock the office door midday, or when Harper would slip into the shop after closing, leaving 20 minutes later with a tote bag that looked heavier than when she arrived, and I began quietly checking the books when no one was around, only to find pages missing from the sales ledger, and strange coded entries in the digital files, strings of numbers and letters that didn't match any product we sold. I might have dismissed it all as paranoia if it weren't for the night I went to the Hollow, a local bar, and saw Harper in a back booth with a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, sharp suit, the kind of person who didn't belong in Briarwood, handing her an envelope thick enough to make my stomach drop. She didn't see me, but I saw her slip the envelope into her coat and leave without looking back, and when I asked her the next day where she'd been, she lied so easily it made my skin crawl. Still, I didn't confront her, not yet, because by then I had a new goal: to figure out what my family was hiding. Without tipping them off, and to do that, I had to act like nothing had changed, even as I felt the ground shifting under my feet. The turning point came 2 weeks later when a delivery arrived during my shift, a large wooden crate addressed to Merrick's finds, but with no return address, and the delivery driver, who I'd known since high school, gave me a strange look as he handed me the clipboard and muttered, "Careful with that one," before walking out. The crate was heavier than it looked, and when I pried it open just enough to peek inside, I didn't see antiques. I saw stacks of unmarked boxes, the kind you'd expect to find in a warehouse, not a family shop, and my hands trembled as I closed it up again, because whatever this was, it was bigger than just Harper sneaking around or Dad hiding some shady side hustle. I started staying late more often, searching for patterns, and one night, I found them, a hidden folder on the office computer labeled Briarwood Accounts, containing spreadsheets with names I didn't recognize, transaction amounts in the thousands, and recurring payments to LD Enterprises, a business that, according to the state registry, didn't exist. That was when I realized I wasn't just looking at questionable business practices. I was staring at the skeleton of something criminal, something my family was knee-deep in, and the worst part was knowing that If I walked away now, I'd never get the truth, but if I stayed, I might find out more. Then I was ready to handle, and yet standing there in the dim light of the office, I felt a new determination settle in my chest. Because whatever they were hiding, I was going to uncover it, and when I did, I wasn't just going to confront them, I was going to make them regret ever thinking they could keep me in the dark for the next few days. I could hardly focus on anything except the plan brewing inside my head, and every time I walked into the kitchen or the living room and saw my father sitting there pretending everything was normal, it only fueled the fire in my chest. But I knew I had to be careful because one wrong move and he would either turn it all around on me or find a way to make sure I was the one who looked like the problem. So instead, I began gathering little pieces of information. When he left for work, who he called, the names of people he texted, and even receipts I found in his jacket pockets because every scrap might help me later. Meanwhile, I had started subtly asking my mom questions, not directly about the betrayal, but about her feelings and about the business trips my dad claimed to take. And I could see in her eyes she sensed something was wrong, even though she kept insisting she was fine, and that only made my heart ache more because she had spent years building a life with this man only to be kept in the dark. One evening I overheard him on the phone in the garage, speaking in a tone I had never heard him use with my mom, low, gentle, almost rehearsed, and I caught the name Marissa, which I immediately memorized, then hurried back to my room before he noticed. I was listening, and that night I stayed up on my laptop searching through every social media platform I could think of until I found her, a woman in her late 30s, polished and confident looking, with photos in front of expensive restaurants and weekend trips that matched the dates my dad had been working out of town, and with every image I saw my stomach twisted tighter. I printed a few of them and tucked them into a folder hidden under my bed because I knew there would come a moment when evidence would matter, and I didn't want to rely solely on my memory. During all of this, my younger brother, Tyler, had been acting strangely distant toward Dad too, which made me wonder if he had also noticed something off, so I tested the waters by making a casual comment about how Dad seemed busier lately, and to my surprise, Tyler's face hardened before he admitted he had caught Dad lying about where he was one Saturday, but he hadn't said anything because he didn't want to break the family apart. And hearing that just made me more determined if my brother was already questioning him. Then the truth was strong enough to expose on its own. Still, I knew simply telling Mom without a plan could backfire, so I decided to wait for the right moment when the emotional impact would be undeniable, the kind of moment where there would be no space for excuses, and in the meantime I kept building my arsenal, noting patterns in his behavior, like how he always left his phone face down and muted whenever he was home, or how he suddenly became obsessed with helping a friend invest in a property an hour away, and the more I connected the dots, the clearer it became that this wasn't a one-time mistake, it was an entire secret life. Then about a week later, that right moment practically delivered itself when my dad announced at dinner that he had to leave the next day for a last-minute business conference in Chicago, and while Mom just nodded like she always did, something in me snapped because I knew he was lying, so I excused myself early, went upstairs, and started packing a small overnight bag, not for him but for me, because I was going to follow him, and the next morning when he left the house around 6 a.m. I waited 2 minutes, grabbed my car keys, and held him at a safe distance, my heart pounding the whole time. As expected, he didn't head toward the highway that led to the airport. Instead, he drove straight to a coffee shop on the other side of town where Marissa was already waiting outside, and the moment they embraced, my hands tightened on the steering wheel so hard they ached, but I forced myself to stay calm, took several photos from my phone, and even recorded a short video through my windshield for undeniable proof. I followed them from the coffee shop to a boutique hotel, and, while part of me wanted to storm in right then and there, I reminded myself that patience was power, so I waited until they disappeared into the lobby, then went inside myself and pretended to be a guest inquiring about a room, slipping in a question about whether my husband had already checked in under the name Daniel Miller, and when the receptionist confirmed with a cheerful smile that Mr. Miller had indeed just arrived with his wife, I almost laughed at the audacity of it all. I thanked her politely, walked out, and sat in my car, replaying the entire scene in my head, already imagining the way this evidence was going to shatter the false image my father had built. For the rest of the day, I kept tabs on them from a distance, grabbing coffee, waiting in parking lots, noting every detail like a detective building a case file, and by the time I finally went home that evening, I had everything I needed: photos, video confirmation from a hotel employee, and a renewed fire in my chest to see this through to the bitter end. That night I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about my mom and how she had spent 2 decades loving a man who didn't deserve her loyalty, and I knew the next step would be the hardest part, telling her the truth in a way that left no room for denial or manipulation, and making sure my dad's lies crumbled in front of both of us at the same time. The next morning, I woke up with that tight, nervous energy you get before doing something you know will change everything, and as I sat at the kitchen table sipping my coffee, I kept rehearsing the words in my head, trying to figure out the best way to break it to my mom without it sounding like gossip or some teenage overreaction. But before I could say anything, Dad breezed into the room with his usual fake smile, kissing her on the cheek, like he hadn't just spent the night in a hotel with another woman. And something about that scene, him acting so normal while she busied herself making breakfast, made me want to vomit. Still, I bit my tongue and waited until he left for work, then took a deep breath and asked Mom if we could talk privately, leading her into the living room, where I pulled out the folder from under my bed and laid it on the coffee table, my hands trembling as I opened it to reveal the photos of him with Marissa, the hotel parking lot, and the screenshot of her social media page. At first she didn't say a word, just stared at the pictures like her brain couldn't process them, then slowly looked up at me with tears welling in her eyes, whispering, "How long have you known?" And I told her everything, how I'd overheard his call, tracked down Marissa, followed him, even confirmed his check-in at the hotel. And though she flinched at each detail, she didn't stop me, because I think some part of her had already suspected but didn't want to face it without proof. After I finished, she sat in silence for what felt like forever, and then instead of crying harder or denying it, her face hardened in a way I had never seen before, and she said, "If he thinks he's going to humiliate me and keep his little secret life, he's got another thing coming." And that's when I realized she wasn't going to be the victim. She was ready to fight. Together, we began discussing what to do, and while my initial instinct was to confront him at home, Mom had a more strategic mind about it, suggesting that we wait for a family dinner he had planned for Sunday with some close relatives and drop the truth in front of everyone, so there would be no way for him to twist it into a private disagreement. And the more we talked, the more it made sense, corner him socially and emotionally all at once. Over the next few days, we pretended everything was fine, keeping our usual routines while secretly preparing for Sunday, and during that time I managed to get even more proof by borrowing routines while secretly preparing for Sunday, and during that time I managed to get even more proof by borrowing Tyler's help. He was hesitant at first, but agreed after I showed him the hotel video. And he actually caught Dad texting Marissa while at work, sending messages like, "Can't wait to see you again," and she's still clueless, which only added fuel to the fire. Mom printed those messages and added them to the folder, and by Saturday night we had a small but powerful arsenal of evidence ready to detonate. When Sunday finally came, I could barely sit still, my heart thudding in my chest as relatives began arriving, all smiles and laughter, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. And when Dad walked in looking smug in his press shirt, I almost pitied him. Almost. Dinner started out like any other, small talk and passing dishes around, but about halfway through Mom cleared her throat and said she wanted to share something important with the family, and as everyone turned toward her, I slid the folder across the table toward Dad, who frowned as he opened it, and I swear the color drained from his face the second he saw the photos. Before he could speak, Mom started laying out the timeline calmly and clearly explaining each piece of evidence while passing around the pictures and printed messages, and the silence in the room was so thick you could hear the clock ticking in the background. Finally, one of my aunts broke the silence by saying, "Daniel, how could you?" And that was all it took. The room erupted with relatives demanding answers, some angry, some shocked, while Dad stammered and tried to claim it was just a misunderstanding. But Mom shut him down instantly by playing the hotel video on her phone, the image of him and Marissa walking hand in hand into the lobby, glowing on the screen for everyone to see. There was no coming back from that, and the more he tried to explain, the deeper he dug himself into a hole, until finally Mom stood up, looked him dead in the eye, and told him to pack his things because she wasn't going to share her home with a liar, a cheater, and a coward. The rest of the evening was chaos. Some relatives followed him as he stormed out, others stayed to comfort Mom, and I just sat there feeling a strange mix of triumph and sadness, because even though I had wanted this truth to come out, it still hurt to see the man who raised me crumble in front of everyone. Later that night, after the last guest left, Mom and I sat on the couch in the quiet, holding mugs of tea, And she thanked me for having the courage to dig for the truth, telling me that as painful as it was, at least now she could move forward without lies. But deep down I knew this wasn't over, because if I had learned anything from watching my dad these past few weeks, it was that men like him don't just walk away quietly, and I had a gut feeling he was going to try to get back at us, which meant we needed to be ready for whatever came next. In the days after the explosive dinner, our house felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter without Dad's fake charm and constant lies hanging in the air, but heavier with the knowledge that he was still out there simmering with humiliation, and as Mom predicted, it didn't take long for him to strike back. One afternoon about a week later, she came home from work visibly shaken, holding a letter from his lawyer, claiming she'd abandoned the marriage and demanding a huge share of the house plus spousal support, and I could see the rage bubbling under her calm exterior as she read the ridiculous accusations out loud, each one more insulting than the last. But instead of panicking, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "If he wants war, he's going to get war." And that night we sat at the dining table and planned our counterattack, not just legally but socially, because if there was one thing Dad cared about more than money, it was his reputation. We started by gathering every shred of evidence we hadn't yet used, including more texts from Marissa that Tyler had managed to get by posing as one of Dad's old friends online. Messages where Dad bragged about how easy it was to keep 2 women in the palm of his hand, and how he deserved someone younger, and Mom's lawyer was practically gleeful when he saw them, saying they'd crush his claims in court. But we didn't stop there. Mom reached out to a few of Dad's business contacts under the guise of clearing up some misunderstandings, and made sure they saw the hotel video and screenshots too, all without directly accusing him, letting the evidence speak for itself. And within a week, the whispers started, first in his office, then among our extended family, until it was clear his perfect image was collapsing. Furious Dad showed up at the house one evening unannounced, pounding on the door until Mom opened it, and I'll never forget the way she stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, as he tried to push past her spewing accusations about me being poisoned against him. But she didn't flinch. She simply told him the locks had been changed and that any further harassment would be met with a restraining order. He left swearing under his breath, but even then I could see the desperation in his eyes, because he knew he was losing control of the narrative. The court case moved quickly thanks to the damning evidence, and within 2 months, Mom not only kept the house but also secured a settlement that left Dad financially cornered. And as if that weren't enough, Marissa dumped him after finding out he'd been lying to her too, leaving him alone in a tiny apartment on the edge of town. The final blow came when one of his biggest clients dropped him, citing concerns about professional conduct, and that's when I trusted from my research and handed over everything, every recording, every manifest, every spreadsheet, even the footage from the cannery, neatly organized in a binder that laid out the whole operation from start to finish. Harris's eyes widened as he flipped through it, telling me this was enough to bury them, and all I had to do was sit back and watch, which I did with a strange sense of detachment, as over the next week quiet surveillance turned into coordinated raids. Kane was picked up at a private airstrip trying to leave the state. Dad was let out of the bookstore in handcuffs. Ethan was arrested at his apartment, and Matthew, my almost husband, was taken straight from his law office in front of clients and coworkers, his face a mask of disbelief, as if he still couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so fast. The media feasted on the story of the Whitmore smuggling ring, painting them as a family enterprise gone rotten, but what no one knew, what I never tell anyone except here, is that it wasn't greed or ambition that destroyed them. It was me patiently pulling at the threads until the whole thing collapsed. Mom, when I told her, didn't cry, didn't yell. She just sat back in her chair, took my hand, and whispered, "I always knew you were stronger than them." And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something like peace. Matthew tried to contact me from jail, sending letters that I never opened. Ethan's lawyer sent a request for a private conversation that I ignored, and Dad's betrayal cut the deepest, but watching him avoid my eyes in the courtroom was closure enough. Kane, on the other hand, stared at me once during the hearing with a look that promised he'd remember my face, but by then I'd already taken steps to disappear from his world entirely, selling my share of the bookstore, changing my number, moving Mom to a quiet lakeside town where no one knew our name, and letting the Whitmore legacy rot in the headlines. Revenge, I learned, isn't about rage or even justice. It's about control, about taking back the power they tried to strip from you and using it to write the ending on your terms. And as I stood on our new porch one crisp autumn morning, coffee In hand watching the sun rise over the water, I realized I'd done exactly that. The people who tried to use me were gone, the truth was out, and the life I had now was mine alone. No shadows, no lies, just the knowledge that if anyone ever tried to break me again, I'd already proven I knew exactly how to break them first. Thanks for listening to my story. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.